Hello everybody, welcome to What Culture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, are you excited for a new Nintendo Switch?
Yeah.
Good, because there's some vague details doing the rounds as to what the next Nintendo Switch's power specs may or may not be. Coming from the ongoing trial between the FTC and Microsoft over their acquisition of Activision Blizzard. This was an email that was revealed between Activision's Bobby Kotick and Nintendo's president Shuntaro Furukawa discussing the power specs of the next Nintendo system. Now, coming from Bobby's side, big old Bobby, Robert, he says that the next Switch, or whatever we end up calling it, will apparently be in close alignment to the power specs of the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, pointing to your face.
I'll explain that first in a little bit.
Oh my god. So obviously as this generation rolled out, it only became more and more apparent how underpowered the Switch has been and how much, third-party titles attempting to make a Switch version are drastically underpowered. Kotick, in the same email exchange, did say that he undervalued this in regards to the original Switch and said the Call of Duty should have always been on there, or wanted to be on there. But he said it's reasonable to assume that they can make something compelling for the next generation Switch. So it seems like Call of Duty is going to be on Switch regardless of whether this deal actually goes through.
I'm bursting at the seams to talk about this because, on the one hand, I was never expecting the next Nintendo piece of hardware to, compete with the machines that we currently have from Sony and Microsoft, the PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series X. They've never been interested in going head-to-head in that way. But to learn that it's going to be more comparable to the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, to me, that is disappointing because say there's Switch 2, just to refer to it as that for ease in this video, comes out next year. That's an 11-year gap between that piece of hardware and the closest equals to it, being those machines I just mentioned. And to me, that's just a shame because some next-gen features have become so standard now that I can't ever go back. I really, really liked Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and playing that was a really, lovely time. But certain elements just felt a little bit archaic to me. I love the ability to see into shrines, when you open them, you got the little tease of the entrance.
They look bigger than they actually are if you look at the camera,
Really cool. But the loading times in that game made me appreciate, the SSD loading times in the PlayStation 5 so much more because it felt like we've almost, leapfrogged that as a thing. So to go back is a shame, and this to me indicates that those kinds of features, those real under-the-hood advancements won't be there for the Switch 2. I hope they are.
This is we're at the weirdest crossroads of where consoles are at, where PC gaming are, and where the idea of what a next-gen system is or a next-gen game is, where all that stuff is at, because you have on the Xbox side, you have the feature parity stuff between Xbox Series X and Series S, conversations doing the rounds in regards to which the main system actually is. We covered this on the news, I think earlier in the week or last week, that overall, as far as Microsoft / Xbox are concerned, the Xbox Series S is their main system and the X is the deluxe version, which is kind of why they always mandate games that are released on the Series X also being on the Series S. But it does mean that you have something being held back, personally it does to me anyway. It feels like certain game designs are being held back because they have to work on the lower powered systems. That's a story doing the rounds for Baldur's Gate 3 right now as well, that Microsoft's own engineers have apparently been helping Larian get the Baldur's Gate over the line to make it work on Series S, because it just isn't getting there, but it is there on Series X. That almost fundamentally proves to me that you're holding design back because of a more depowered system. Whether it all relates to Nintendo will obviously be third party. If you're making something that works on Switch, it has to work on the lowest system, and this will always be the lowest system.
That's it, and it's why I question Bobby saying, I'm sure we can make something good for the next Switch.
We can make something.
That's it. It's like, you can probably make something, but it's not going to be anywhere near a modern Call of Duty, right? Because they're only going to get more advanced as the years go on, and the developers take more advantage of the hardware at their disposal when they cut off the previous gen versions of Call of Duty and they fully go all in on, Warzone, which is really intensive because you've got this huge map, you've got all these players, and you've got this high fidelity and high frame rate as well. I just don't see how you can get anywhere close to parity with those Call of Duty titles if they're running on a Series X and they're running on a Switch 2, even if it does have this power. You could get a Call of Duty on there, but what's that gonna look like? Is it gonna feel good? Is it gonna be something that people want to play on a Switch, or if they'll just prefer to buy a PC or another machine to get the premium version of it?
Well, I feel like it's stretching out the bar of how many different versions of a game a developer is supposed to cater to. It's in another given year, the Nintendo Switch 2 or whatever it is comes out, but they're still developing games that have to work on that, which are almost in line with PlayStation 4 and Xbox One games. It's more seldom seen now that everything has a release across the current generation, being the PS5 side of the Xbox Series, and the previous stuff. Like the new AEW game is on everything, but I feel like I haven't seen that amount of releases in quite so, like, in a good few months, let's say, or about a year or so. Final Fantasy 16 exclusive to PlayStation 5 and benefits from instant loading and things like that. It's just an interesting quandary in terms of like how a dev even approaches putting their idea out to the public. Like, if you want to make it on Switch, you have to make a more depowered version. If you want to take advantage of the full tech and the SSD and everything else like that, you can't then put it on Switch, assumedly, unless this pulls something out of the bag and it can keep up with that stuff.
And I do worry about Call of Duty specifically because those games are always down to the wire anyway. You look at the amount of studios that work on every Call of Duty release, and it is insane. Like, so many Activision studios, they get so much help on those big titles, and they just about get it over the line. Even then, there are so many internal reports and reports by the likes of Jason Schreier that dive into how last minute these games can be and how the developers are like getting called in off other games to work on the recent games because things are going wrong. All of that stuff. To me, adding in a brand new machine that has these unique specifications or will need a unique version, that's only going to exacerbate those things, I imagine. I'm not a game developer, but judging on how difficult it's sometimes been to juggle all of these different SKUs in the past and the issues that's led to. You look at something like Battlefield 4, which was a launch game for the previous generation of consoles, came out on the PlayStation 4. And EA has been on the record saying that what killed that game at launch was that they were juggling too many versions of it, and they had to get it out then, or at least, they needed to appease the shareholders or whatever, and that's what kind of led to everything crashing down. So yeah, I'd echo what you said there. It makes me worry about how stretched thin these developers may be and how that's going to actually impact the quality of all of the versions, not just the Switch version.
I tell you what it makes me think of is the way that EA approach FIFA on Switch, where you don't get the version that is the regular version. Let's say if it's the main console version, it's like the Legacy Edition.
Yeah.
And for the longest time, and they ended up getting caught, let's say, with this, where IGN just repasted their same review 2 years in a row because they were like, look, it's the same game, the same with a different box art or whatever. But it's fundamentally listed as the FIFA. I think it's the Legacy Edition or the Legend Edition. Either way, it's a Switch-specific version. I wonder if that's what we'll get for Call of Duty. In terms of depowered Call of Duties, like there was the PS Vita one, which like the control scheme's kind of what killed that because it didn't have a second analog stick. Sorry, it didn't map the buttons the same way the main system would. Call of Duty Mobile, like I really liked that. I had a good time with that in 2020 or whatever. But I think that's obviously there's lower expectations there because it's on mobile. Like it's kind of proven that you can do a nice, snappy, responsive Call of Duty on a phone.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things where overall, in terms of the dev time, in terms of the expectation of the next generation of systems and what people want from gameplay mechanics, if you're making something on Switch, then fundamentally it's going to hold everything else back.
I just wonder how much Nintendo are even bothered about the third-party stuff at this point.
That's
like,
a good point.
Switch wasn't all that bothered about it. Of course, it had some big third-party games on there, but like you said, a lot of them came with caveats, or they were streamed, or whatever. And yet, the Switch is still a hugely popular console. It's absolutely selling hand over fist right now. Everyone loves it. It's amazing. I want to see a proper successor to that personally, like a genuine iteration on the hybrid between docked and handheld machine. But maybe they just kind of aren't bothered, and they're just like, yeah, we would love a Call of Duty if you want to make us one. And Bobby Kotick's obviously saying, there's potential there, but I imagine if Activision said, you know what, this is too underpowered, we're not going to do it, Nintendo would be like, all right, cool. Your loss, not mine.
It's such a crazy thing in terms of the, like you said, the difference, the distance between the third-party stuff and the first-party stuff. Something like Metroid Dread, I would say, looks absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
The new Super Mario Brothers Wonder, the one that just got shown off, where he's high as AF. It looks gorgeous. All the background detail, the amount of different things that are being filled out there, even compared to the last new Super Mario Brothers that was remastered on the Wii from Wii U onto Switch. There's still a big leap there, and there's that big difference between how much effort Nintendo's first-party, how much mastery they have over that tech, and then how that comes across in the third-party stuff, and just how many disastrous third-party ports there have been. Outer Worlds being an absolute ridiculous thing where the textures wouldn't even load. I feel like even now, every time something releases on Switch, and I'm doing this for the AEW game right now, I'm debating buying it on Switch as well. I feel like every time something releases on the Switch, everyone gets on Google and says, okay, but is it actually running? Like, is it actually going to work? And Nintendo has that reputation for their third parties, and it's like, you would hope that this console could fix that.
You'd
but
hope.
Like you said, they just might not care.
Going to first-party stuff, I know you briefly mentioned it there. You play the Switch way more than I do.
Every
I
day,
jump
baby.
in, every few months to play a Zelda or to play some indie games on it, and I'm fine with that. I love my Switch, but I just don't use it as much as the PlayStation and Xbox that I own. But with that, I've kind of become, familiar with what the Xbox Series X and the PS5 is capable of outputting. There is a bar that now I expect is standard from games, so that kind of hurts me because when I go to play something like Tears of the Kingdom, again, a game I really loved, I can't help but be a little bit disappointed in the back of my brain.
The shadows almost sliced your eye out.
That's it, by
Jagged.
the jaggies of the shadows, or, the resolution, or the pop-in, and all of that stuff. And I do think Tears of the Kingdom still can look absolutely gorgeous, especially when you get those sunrises and sunsets, but I would be lying to say that I wasn't playing it thinking about how better it could have been in terms of the technical side of things if it had that horsepower, if it could impress me in the same way that, some of the Sony first-party stuff does. And I know there's never going to be that level of parity, but when I played Breath of the Wild way back when, even though it was obviously underpowered compared to the competition at the time, it blew me away in a way that Tears just didn't, because I could see the seams of the technology buckling under the ambition of that game.
Totally, Tears is so similar to Breath of the Wild, so you're ostensibly playing a 2017 game in 2023, or it looks like that to some degree anyway. My thing with all of this, with the way the generation's rolling out and whatever, is just that conversation or that presentation that Mark Cerny gave right at the beginning of the generation, where he talked about deleting loading times, minimizing that stuff, how that would change the way that developers approach level design, approach gameplay mechanics. Things would play in ways that we couldn't even conceive of because you're freeing up all these limitations. And all I see from these news things are limitations. The idea that we're still going to be having... And it's not... I'm the biggest guy to say that I don't care about resolution. Both of us are loving Stay Out of the House, and that's a game that looks like it's made of a bunch of cubes of ham. It's great. Looks like a PS1 aesthetic. But still, I just feel like overall, it's not a promise of the generation, but the idea of the new generation was what gameplay systems can we think of? What different ways to approach game design? What level design can we think of? And so far, the nearest thing we've got is, we got rid of load times, like in Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart or in Final Fantasy 16, which are 2 games in 3 years. And so it's one of those things where I still just hope for a really good future. I guess Returnal had it as well. But I hope for a future where all these limitations are freed up and not sort of we're not reminded of them, by a system coming out that has specs that are in line with things from arguably 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So I just want a cool, crazy, fun, resolution-free future.
Me too, but that said, I will buy the Switch 2, even if it does play like a PlayStation 4, because even that's going to be a market improvement on what the Switch can currently output. And you always have to go back to the idea that we've talked about here and there throughout this video, and that is Nintendo plays ball in its own playground. You know what I mean? It's concerned about what's happening over there. It isn't really concerned about what the competition is doing to this extent. So it's going to be interesting to see how it impacts the wider industry. But I think ultimately the first-party Nintendo output is going to be as strong as it's ever been and will benefit from the resolution bump. I just wonder with games like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, they're obviously trying to be bigger in the gun open world, and they're chucking a bunch of stuff in, and I wonder if PS4-style tech will be able to accommodate the ambition of some of the developers.
You would hope so. I think in terms of the Switch reaching for stuff, if you compare what Tears of the Kingdom managed to pull off, which is largely a miracle in terms of that tech, and then look at what Pokemon Scarlet and Violet did, and the unbelievable girth and quality there. Now that's more of a reflection on just how much time Nintendo's that specific Zelda team were given versus Game Freak. But at the same time, it does spell out that the hardware needs a considerable upgrade. But let us know what you think down in the comments below, and check this video out right here for some recommendations for the new generation. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.